I was craving now, Father, by the power of grace divine. Let my soul look up with a steadfast hope, and my will be lost in thine. Create the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts may be acceptable to you, O God, our Creator and our Redeemer. Amen. It is exciting to be here with you all. This heat is a little bit different than Nashville heat, but it is amazing to be here. And for some reason, I'm a little bit nervous because I haven't been in a theological setting in a little bit. I serve a small congregation now in Nashville of 99 members called the Tennessee House of Representatives. And I'm trying to convince my congregants to lay down the sins and burdens of white supremacy and xenophobia. And I kind of remember when I first started preaching, I was at a church. I said, how long do I have to talk? And to preach, they said you can preach as long as you want, but we leave at 12 o'clock. So I'm not gonna keep you long. So today I just want to speak very briefly on the message of resurrection. It's not a moment; it's a movement. And this resurrection I'm talking about is I'm going to be citing Ezekiel 37, 1 through 10, as well as John 11, 1 through 45. But before I get into that, I kind of want to give a little bit more context about our trip to the border. I'll kind of give you a context of where I come from in this work. And so before I was elected, one thing that a lot of people may not know is that I was arrested 18 times and I was banned from the state capitol. And now I serve as the youngest Black representative in the most diverse district of our state. The same troopers who took me to jail and who took me to court on these charges now hold the door open and say, "Welcome, representative, to your office." That is the power of the Spirit. We were able to prove each of these charges to be false. And what we were trying to do was remove idols of white supremacy. In our state capitol, we had a statue of a KKK Grand Wizard that stood in the most prominent place of our state capitol, an idol. And we would tell them that if we could not remove this overt symbol of white supremacy, this blatant symbol put up in 1978, then how would we remove the more sophisticated and subtle policies of white supremacy that this statue represents? So we set on a mission to remove the statue, but not only to remove the statue, to remove the statutes, the policies, and laws that this statue represents. I come from a state where 20% of Black people cannot vote because of felony disenfranchisement laws. 20%, 1 in 5 Black Tennesseans cannot vote. And so this is the context in which I serve. And in fact, when we went to the border, it was one of the most amazing trips. And I think I reached out to some of the folks here at Fellowship about the response I got when I got back to the House floor. You were voting on this very archaic and hateful xenophobic legislation to send in solidarity, to send our National Guard to the border. And I talked about the people I met, people like Javier from Venezuela that almost with us and helped interpret. And I shared his story about when we walked across the border with him and how he had went through the Darien Gap and the violence and brutality he experienced. I told the story on the House floor, and the response of my colleagues was not compassion and justice. It was calling for my resignation because they interpreted it as Representative Jones just admitted on the House floor to help people illegally cross the border. And that is the mindset that they had. That is the response they had. My first week in the legislature, I had just been elected and I was going to committee, and one of my colleagues, State Senator Jack Johnson, our Republican majority leader, decided to welcome me to the legislature. And his welcome to me was saying, "Jones, I just want you to know that you're worthless and you're not supposed to be here." I was shocked. But in hindsight, I actually give thanks to my brother, Senator Johnson, because he reminded me a very important lesson, that I'm in that body not to make friends. We're there to make change for our district. And so I'm here to talk about resurrection. And I just want to tell you about resurrection coming from a place that is a valley of dry bones. That's what I'm trying to tell you. A valley where each day we walk in and say, "Can these bones live again?" A valley in which people are dying from the lack of access to healthcare. A valley in which people are dying because of mass shooting, which is the #1 cause of death of children in my state and across this nation. A valley in which 1, 2, 3 Tennesseans die each day because we have not expanded Medicaid. A valley in which we poison our waters and poison our rivers and decided to bow down to corporate interests as opposed to protecting the waterways, which are us and future generations will need. That is the valley in which I work. And that's the valley in which many of us come from, communities that look just like that valley. Can those bones live again? Can our democracy live again? My other job is I'm a political science professor, and one thing I've been teaching my students recently is about this idea of democratic decline, this idea of democratic retrenchment. We know what happened on January 6th. We know what is happening in this nation. Can the dry bones live again in a time where you have somebody without sanity, without compassion, without any type of humanness running, and it's this close? Can this valley of dry bones, can it live again? You have a time in which people are trafficking in misinformation and conspiracy theories and culture wars, not compassion and justice. Can these dry bones live again? We come in a time in which autocrats are rising and showing solidarity with each other, from here in the US to Viktor Orban, to the leader of India, to the leader of the Philippines. All across this nation, we see authoritarianism rising. We're seeing a time of democratic retrenchment. Can these dry bones live again? Why is this election so close? How long, oh God? How long? That now the headlines are about attacking our Haitian sisters and brothers to distract us from the real issues of threats to our communities. Can these dry bones live again? And then we go to Lazarus. And something I was in the back room taking notes because I've been reflecting on this as I was sitting there, that the idea of resurrection and insurrection, they come from the same root. They both mean to rise up. But here's the difference. We're in Texas. I live in Tennessee. We both have crazy governors. But we had a lot of folks from our states who went to the insurrection. And I believe that the difference between a resurrection and an insurrection is that an insurrection is about trying to bring up what was. We often hear it in our southern states: the South will rise again. The South will rise again. That is an insurrection. It's about something rising up again, something that is dying. We hear insurrection, we say, let's make America great again, making this mythology of what was, instead of God's prophetic vision of what can be. Make America great again versus make America what it ought to be. The beloved community, a multiracial democracy, a multi-faith democracy, a community where we uplift our freedom brothers and sisters, uplift those who are on the margins. That's what we can be as a nation. But make America great again. This is the insurrection that we're talking about, is rising up again. You know, in the South, in Tennessee, I don't know if you have it in Texas, we have a saying that says, a dying mule kicks the hardest. A dying mule kicks the hardest. This mule of white supremacy, seeing the diversifying America, now wants to say that DEI is a bad word. Now wants to say that CRT, critical race theory, is a threat to the social fabric of this nation. That culturally relevant teaching is a threat to the fabric of this nation. That is the terror that we're facing. And yet we must offer a counter vision rooted in a resurrection that says the South will not rise again, but the South can rise anew. That we can build a new South, that we are representing a new South by being here at this conference and saying that we know what the story is of our states. That we're often told that much change in our communities are impossible, immovable, that the South is a solid South. But we come here in a tradition that says, no, we know that the South is the front line of our democracy. That if we want to change this nation, we have to change the South. It's going to take people who are doing unusual things outside of the ordinary, to bring about the resurrection of a movement needed in times like these. And so in Tennessee, I'll tell you what that looked like. On April 6, 2023, last year, we were expelled because, unlike here on the House floor, after a mass shooter took the lives of 3 9-year-olds and 3 adults, we were told that you cannot speak about the issue of gun violence, that we must talk about our regular agenda. So we're not going to bring that up. We'll have a moment of silence, then we're going to move on, because we have more pressing matters that we have to address than the deaths of our babies. And so each time we rose to speak, the speaker would cut off our microphone, shut off our voting machine. And so how did we respond? We responded in the legacy of other young people who stood in Nashville. One in particular who says that when you see something that is wrong, that is unjust, that is unfair, you must find a way to get in the way and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And so the next time the speaker cut off our microphone, I pulled a megaphone out of my pocket. Because we were not going to let them silence the voices of these young people, middle school students, high school students who came to our state capitol by the thousands saying, do something, do something. They responded by calling for our expulsion, which had not happened in our state's history, to be expelled for your First Amendment rights, to be kicked out of your job that you were democratically elected to by an entirely white caucus who really were saying that this was not about kicking me or Representative Pearson out. It was about kicking out our movement, about saying that your vision of a new South that says we want to protect kids and not guns is not welcome here. And so they expelled us. And I'll tell you how ironic it was that these folks who love to cite the Bible, who tried to make the Bible one of our state books, in fact, did not realize that they expelled us on the day before Good Friday, that they held this scam trial, that they held this false hearing the day before Good Friday. And that by the Spirit of God, we were restored the day after Easter. There is the resurrection power moving in the South. That they tried to crucify democracy, and they forgot that we also stand in the legacy of liberation. That we stand in the legacy of liberation that says, I come from a state that is the birthplace of the Klan, of the KKK, but is also the birthplace of the Nashville student movement, where young people like Diane Nash, and John Lewis, and Bernard Lafayette, and C.T. Vivian, and Reverend James Lawson rose up in a revolution against Jim Crow and made our city the first Southern city to desegregate its lunch counters. Young people who said we must sit down as a way to stand up. That we're not going to wait for you to bring about this new world, but that by sitting down at lunch counters, white and black, that we are going to embody the world that we're fighting for with our mere presence, with our very presence, that we are going to show you the type of nation that we can be. And so that's the difference between resurrection and insurrection. But if we go to Lazarus, in this time of death, if we hear Lazarus' story, we hear Jesus get there, and we hear the response saying, you're too late. God, you're too late. We're 42 days from the election. We're too late. We are seeing this crisis. How many people have died already? We're too late. That the forces we're up against, they've already amassed so much power in terms of media, this disinformation and misinformation. They've already enacted policies of voter suppression. We just saw yesterday in Oklahoma, we were talking about 450,000 people kicked off the voter roll, purged. We're too late. We see the systems of power already conniving and saying that no matter what happens, they already know that this election has been stolen. We're too late. That in this time of such retrenchment and such stark resistance to each other, are we too late? Where half of this nation still is making this election a close one. Are we too late? But what does Jesus say? He says, move the stone. Move the stone. What is moving the stone? Moving the structural barriers that are keeping people in these systems and places of death. Move the stone, move the barriers, the systemic and structurally created barriers that are keeping our migrant brothers and sisters locked in a system of death in which they have to risk their lives to try and find another opportunity, a better opportunity. When Trump and Vance started attacking Haitian community, I was thinking about our trip home, of all the Haitian migrants you introduced us to, and when we were down at the border, people who had been there for years come from Chile and then came to Reynosa trying to come here the legal way. And what we kept hearing was, how many years on the waiting list? How few folks in the bureaucratic process? We must move these stones. And moving the stones does not mean more razor wire, National Guard. We must move the stones. But if we move the stones, you don't know the smell. There's a smell. It's gonna make us uncomfortable. It's gonna make us put us in a place that we don't want to be. There's a smell there. It's something that is not going to make us feel pleasant and comfortable all the time. So if we move these structural barriers, if we really imagine a system as an alternative to incarceration, that may not be comfortable. I agree with you some ways, but if we get rid of the incarceration system, then what are we going to do? It's going to put us in a system of me having to be, proximate to people who, these are the excuses we hear. I'm gonna just be honest. I see so many people who love to put Black Lives Matter signs in their yard, but who are not willing to show up when it comes to challenging systems of police brutality. Showing up in your presence. I see a lot of people saying that we don't like what Trump's saying, that we condemn it, but don't know the names of the migrants who are getting dropped off to the Greyhound station in their own neighborhood. Proximity is necessary for resurrection. Move the stones and unbind him. Unbind him. Take off the restraints that is keeping our sisters and brothers and siblings from reaching their full potential. Unbind them. Loving our neighbors and loving each other is not just a word, it's an action that requires us to be present and to do things out of the ordinary, to unbind folks, and to unbind each other from things that we may not even know that are binding us right now. We'll love you, but we don't want to talk about LGBTQ rights in our organization, but we'll love you at a distance. We'll talk about economic justice, but we won't talk about racism and white supremacy. We won't use those words because they make us uncomfortable. How are we going to have a single issue movement if we don't live single issue lives? And one of the biggest things I've been pushing my colleagues about in this work is we talk about this crisis of democracy. A critical front that we must uplift that has been critical since the founding of this nation is the retrenchment when it comes to racial justice. You cannot talk about democratic rights without talking about racial justice. If we look at the attacks right now, it's about banning books. It's about banning history of Black history. It's about banning Black lawmakers, as we saw in my state. And so we must connect these struggles if we're going to have resurrection. And the truth be told, for those of us who live in states like Texas and Tennessee and Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, is that we'll hear a lot of folks talking about Project 2025 in this time that we're in. But the truth be told is that Project 2025 is Texas 2024, Tennessee 2024, Mississippi 2024. We are already experiencing this. We are the tip of the spear. And one of the things that is so frustrating as I've traveled this nation is I talk about the South and why we are fighting so hard here. People say, well, just let the South secede, just let them do their own thing. Do you not realize that the majority of Black folks live in the South in this nation? Do you not recognize that the South has been pivotal for advancing democracy from Reconstruction to the Civil Rights Movement to today? The reason that we're seeing so much resistance in the South is because there is so much revolution to quell here. Because if we come together in the South and build these movements that connect Black lives to Indigenous sovereignty, to immigration justice, to LGBTQ rights, to interfaith work with our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Hindu brothers and sisters, our Buddhist brothers and sisters, if we actually come together and say we represent something new, that one, they will try and kick us out. That's the first step they'll try and do. And then two, they will try and demonize us and make us be divided and conquered against each other. And we'll use this system, what I like to call plantation politics, of us versus them, of scarcity mentality. Well, there's only enough for some people to have rights. But if we come together, we can upend centuries-old systems, and the key front in this election going forward, because I'm not here to talk about who to vote for, but I'll tell you who to vote against. And the key message in this election, Kendrick Lamar, does anybody, you know Kendrick Lamar? He has a song, he says, they're not like us. But I'm gonna tell you a secret, this is the difference between us and them, is that when we fight for livable wages, when we fight for healthcare as a human right, when we fight for funding our public schools, when we fight for protecting our waterways, we are fighting for them and their children too. That is what we are doing. That unlike them who are fearful of trying to make us say that it's us versus them, we are saying to them, my brother, I'm fighting for you and your children too. And that's exactly what I told my colleagues on April 6th when they expelled us. They had the news right out there, CNN and all these news stations. They said, what is your message to your Republican colleagues? I said, number one, we are fighting for you and your children too. And number two, this is a sad day for our democracy. But you can take away my title, but you can't take away my purpose. And so these are the friction points that we must find to move us forward in these dark and desolate times. Because I do believe I have seen the power of resurrection. I've seen it recently in Tennessee when Chattanooga, UAW, became the first Southern auto plant to unionize this year since the 1950s. The UAW workers organized, despite the threats, despite the intimidation, they unionized. I saw it this week when something we've been fighting for a long time, the tallest mountain in our state was restored to Puohi, what our Eastern Mediterranean have been demanding. I've seen a resurrection. I've seen resurrection when people like Shondell Brooks, a mother who lost her son in a mass shooting in Nashville, a Black mother, has just been elected as the first Black woman to represent her district, and now somebody who was testified, begging for common sense gun laws, can file legislation on behalf of her son whose life was lost. I'm seeing resurrection happening. I'm seeing resurrection in the South, seeing what is going on in states like North Carolina and Texas and Florida, seeing people actually paying attention to the South and saying that the South is our home too, and the South is worth fighting for. I'm seeing resurrection happening. I'm a testament to resurrection because on April 6th, when they kicked us out, and I want to be clear, there's 3 of us up for expulsion, but only the 2 Black members were expelled, even though we all did the same thing. They were clear where they stood, and we are clear in how we responded. Our community rose up by the tens of thousands. I've never seen so many Nashvillians take off work and shut down the streets outside our Capitol, marching from City Hall to the state legislature, where the speaker said, I don't care what the court said, I don't care what his attorney said, we're not reseating him. And then I said, Speaker, welcome to the find out portion of our movement, because you messed around, and now you gotta find out. And I saw young people rise up and take to our Capitol, so much so that my colleagues ended session early. 3 months early, they said, well, there's too much going on, we're gonna end session early, because they thought our movement would be done, but then we came back in August with even more people. This is the find out portion of our movement, which we call resurrection. And so that is what I'm seeing in these times, and I know it is easy to be tired in these times. I've traveled this nation. I'm leaving here to go to another event, trying to lift up this message of fighting for the South. But what I do know for sure is that if we were not powerful, if our power of resurrection and hope was not powerful, they would not be trying so hard to stop us, because they recognize that if we come together, that we can bring down these systems and build something new of what this nation never was but can be. That's what we're seeing today. And so I have hope, not rooted in this false sense of optimism, because I know that resurrection is also being willing to stand on the precipice of death-giving systems, 10 toes down, head held high, saying, I see what you have, but you may have dominant authority, but I know who has the ultimate authority. I know that you have a super majority, but I serve a supernatural God. Hallelujah. And so I know that there's something more powerful than the title of governor. I know the power of the people, which is really the power of the movement of God. That when we come together in a multiracial working class movement, I see the power of God moving in our communities. I saw people have better church than in these buildings on the sidewalks outside the Capitol. I've seen more church from these places of empire, standing on the precipice, the doorsteps of our state capitol, saying, can these dry bones live again? And I saw babies prophesying, young middle schoolers and high schoolers saying, we are going to get you out of here, that we can't vote yet, but guess what? We're coming for your seats. I see the power of the people moving across this nation. And it's being led by young people. That is what gives me hope. That is what gives me hope, is that our opponents have lost a generation. But we cannot do this alone, sisters and brothers. I see a lot of elders here, and I want to just let you know and reassure you that our movement must be also multi-generational, that we cannot do this alone. That is going to take people who like young people, even when what they say is uncomfortable. How many of you all serve in organizations where they say, we love young people, but the young people start talking and they stop saying that? I know a few congregations like that. We have to welcome the innovation of young people. We have to welcome the moral clarity, the boldness of young people who are leading to move this nation forward when it comes to gun violence, when it comes to the climate, when it comes to ending militarization. Young people are leading the way, and we must lift them up and not say, well, I would have did it this way. Let's look at the innovation that they offer this time. Let's look at the creativity. And they may not come to their protests in suits and ties. It may not be like the 1960s, but they do stand in the spirit of the 1960s. I do believe that. I do believe that. And so I'm not a preacher, so I'm not going to keep you too long. And I think we're supposed to have some Q&A, and I would much prefer that because I really, being here is very unusual. Thank you all for being so flexible. I've been in a lot of political rooms lately, a lot of campaign rallies, but to be reminded of what undergirds us in this work, to be around so many faith leaders, to meet so many of you, has been a reminder of that groundwater, that there's some groundwater that will sustain us in this season. Because I do know this to be for sure, that regardless of what happens in November, there's going to be a backlash like we have not seen in this country in a long time. If a Black sister wins president, I'm telling these white nationalists who I've seen marching outside our Capitol are not going to go away quietly. And it's going to require solidarity. It's going to require showing up and not allowing people who are already marginalized to stand by themselves. It's going to require the ministry of both accompaniment and presence. And so I just encourage us to find ways to start building and preparing for what we are going to see, because when people are desperate, they will try and take us down with them. And so we must stand in the power of resurrection and say that we are going to rise anew, that we are going to lift each other up. And so I hope that we find ways to connect with groups like this, going to the border, almost work, making sure that we're proximate to folks who are on the front lines, connecting with those who are already getting death threats, our Haitian sisters and brothers getting death threats because of the absurdity of people's commentary in the media. So just finding ways to show up for each other is going to be key. And it's something that we must take seriously. I was just at a conference with Black elected officials, the first Black woman in the German parliament, the first Black member of the Netherlands parliament, first Black immigrant member of the Netherlands parliament. And one thing that we are all talking about is they are kind of giving us a preview in their countries of when the far right responds to the change in their government systems, of how we must be very realistic about our safety plans and procedures, and make sure that we are very real, that we're not afraid, but that we're realistic about what we're facing. And the Spirit just told me to share that, because I do think that's something that's been in my mind lately. And I hope that we are very cognizant, because our churches are going to be important sanctuaries to build these spaces of safety, what we see. But we know that their insurrection is no power for the power of resurrection. And so God be with us in these times and give us wisdom and discernment to know who we want in our midst and how we can build now, and be proactive and recognize that elections are just one part, but really the work is about what happens after the election, and how we continue to push for policies that center humans and center our sisters and brothers, and that say that this is not about left and right, this is about what is right and wrong. So resurrection is not a moment, it's a movement. Glory be to God. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. You don't know that one? You know this one though. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it at the border, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Amen.
Justin has agreed to answer your questions, and I know you have them. So raise your hand, and I'll just bring you the microphone. Hi, Representative Jones. My name is Lydia Bean. I'm at Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth. I really appreciated what you said about coming together in multiracial working class movement. I'm related to a lot of working class folks in Texas, and I would imagine similar to Tennessee, a lot of those folks have real needs that I think we're fighting for, but may have a different understanding of the political situation. And I wanted to hear what are your thoughts about that, about building solidarity among working class people across race lines when we're being so harshly divided by politicians with such hateful rhetoric who really want to pull us apart from one another.
You know, sorry, can you hear me? I mean, one of the interesting things that I've witnessed recently, I just finished my first term in the legislature, was one of the things that they did as a punishment was they took me off my committees and put me in an agriculture committee because I represent urban district farms in my district. And they thought it was going to be a punishment, but really what it's been able to do is it's put me in a lot more proximity with rural communities. And so I've been going down to the counties I don't represent, you know, visiting folks, trying to talk about the right of farmers to repair their farm equipment, looking at protecting their rivers that their farms sit on from pollution. And I remember the first time I went down, it was before our expulsion and everything happened. I went by myself and coming, you know, again, as the youngest Black lawmaker in some of these places by myself and go walk in people's houses. I got on Fox News. I got these MAGA flags. I was like, Lord, like just be a fence, you know. And so I go in and the unexpected will happen. They'll say, you're the only one who came down to actually hear what is going on, you know, to talk about why we have to drive 3 hours to go to the hospital, you know, talk about why it is that they're trying to build on this Monsanto site in my backyard and it's going to pollute the river and poison my cattle. And so the interesting thing that I noticed was that they had an image of me and I had an image of them when I went down there. And I still, you know, I'm gonna be honest, I left before it was dark because I was like, I'm not gonna be in the middle of nowhere by myself. I'm not crazy. But what I learned was that by talking to them, some of those people who I met months prior to my expulsion, these are people who thought I was a socialist, ungodly, trying to upend the government. With my election, I was organizing for, you know, Black Lives and all these things. But when I got exposed, some of those folks showed up and said, you know, you showed up for us, so we're going to show up for you. And when I started organizing the agriculture committee, I mean, the speaker got scared when I started bringing farmers in there, and they're like, these are farmers from your district. They don't live in my district. And so these are folks who, you know, they said, we need to bring some manure and put it out on the Capitol steps. We'll do it. I said, okay, hold that for now, but we'll keep that in mind. But, you know, like this, to me, it's about, so often we hear people across the nation write off the South. And I think sometimes in Southern states, we write off our rural communities. In Tennessee, we have 95 counties, 90 of them are rural. And so one thing I've been trying to be very intentional about is going outside and pushing my side of the aisle to not neglect our rural communities. We don't have one person on our side of the aisle. I'm trying to speak not politically, but it's kind of hard. Who represents a rural area, and that's a shame. That's horrible in our state. And so we're trying to change that and build these coalitions because they existed. When Tennessee joined the Confederacy, most of our counties in East Tennessee tried to secede from Tennessee and rejoin the Union because they had done organizing. That's why Highlander Folk School, where Dr. King and Rosa Parks were trained, was in East Tennessee and Mount Eagle, Tennessee. You know, this is where civil rights leaders like Septima Clark came up with the idea of citizenship school and freedom schools in East Tennessee coming together. You know, they would put billboards out in these counties saying socialist training school, but they were talking about building across racial lines, across class lines, and even, you know, learning a lot about, you know, the coal workers movement and just how they were able to come together. And so I think, you know, finding ways to show up for things that even may not be in our interest. You know, there's nothing A lot of these things are not in my district, and they don't, they don't impact me directly in my district. But again, I think when people see a show up for them, they'll show up for us. And I'm gonna be real is that the neo-Nazi groups, we've seen such an increase in them in Nashville. We had 3 marches recently, the Proud Boys, Blood and Tribe, and some other name, and then one other group one other white nationalist group. I don't even need to say the name. We don't want to give them credit. And they're out actively recruiting people, actively playing to their peers, and they're going out to these rural counties, putting out literature, holding meetings. And so if they're organized, if we're not organized, then that's going to be the only message they hear. And these people prey on people who are vulnerable, prey on people who are actually hurting from poverty, wages, and lack of health care, but who've been taught to blame immigrants instead of blaming these multinational corporations that are destroying the industries in their region. And so just looking at this through like a populist lens that also centers racial justice, I think is going to be key. But I hope I answered it. I'm good at anecdotes, so that's why
Thank you. We have a question over here, but then I'm coming that way, okay?
Will you please run for president one day?
I'm just trying to keep a job in the Capitol without getting expelled. So you're so kind, but I mean, I don't know if people realize I was only in office for 2 months before I was fired by the Republicans. But then my district sent me back, and we were barely there. And that's my goal right now is really to get more young people to run, more people directly impacted. That's why we've been recruiting. This has been amazing election season. Because a lot of people talk up, are looking at the White House, but I really believe that change comes from the State House, and that this is where we must invest, this is where we must gain seats, and looking at how do we transform these state houses, because they were smart enough to take over them in our school boards and our county commissions, so we must reclaim them, because this is where we set our maps for our legislative districts, this is where we do incarceration policy, education policy, all at the state level, and it's been amazing serving the state legislature. Even with toxic colleagues, because the great thing about the legislature is that our constituents don't have to drive all the way up to Washington, that they can show up and they can be present with us. And that's been the thing that sustained me. A lot of people say, how do you sustain in a building like that? It's the fact that every committee, there's a group of grandmothers called the Circle of Elders who are multiracial. And they said they were not going to leave you here by yourself. And they said in every committee hearing, no matter if it goes until midnight, these grandmothers will sit there and say, you are not by yourself in this building. So I'm going to give you some honor. The work that they're doing.
Representative, thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here in Texas. A question about public schools in Tennessee and what the legislature is doing there from your perspective to combat things like vouchers and to support public schools. I understand that you've been successful in your state in combating those machinations thus far, and it's certainly something that Texas is very threatened by.
Definitely. I mean, this is so connected to this far-right Christian nationalism, because I was sitting committee and everyone said that our schools are indoctrinating this Marxist, loving queer people, all this hate. So we need to let parents send their kids to private schools, really about resegregating our schools. And vouchers, what we can really call them are a scam. It's about, trying to steal money from our public schools to give wealthy people coupons to go to these private schools that can deny children based off of their race, their disability. They have the right to reject students. And so what was successful for us was really, again, rural organizing. Like a lot of these folks in these rural counties, that this voucher bill passes, our schools will be devastated. And none of this is going to go toward, helping build up our counties, but it's really going to just give money to these folks who don't have the interests of Tennesseans in mind. Most of the money to lobby for vouchers came from out of state. I'm sure the same was here in Texas. And none of it's, these out of state folks who are pushing this proposal because they'll see profit from it. And also they want to wage this religious battle of trying to destroy institutions of democracy because they know that public schools, a lot of southern states, I think this is interesting, have the right to public education in their state constitution, which is created after Reconstruction. Like this is something that you look in the North Carolina Constitution, you look in our Tennessee Constitution, it's a right in our state constitution because they saw public education as vital toward advancing democracy, for advancing the true reality of racial justice. And so it's the first thing that we see them attack as they try and dismantle the work that we built to build this idea of a new South. And so I think, again, organizing rural counties has been really key and really telling the truth about what these vouchers would mean, that the majority of Tennesseans won't, but the majority of Texans in your case won't benefit from them. It's a very small minority who would get these vouchers because you still have to pay 50,000, 60,000, 40,000 tuition to go to these private schools. They're saying we'll give you 10,000. What is a working class mom who is struggling to, to get groceries or pay for prescriptions going to do with a $10,000 voucher when there's still a $30,000, $40,000 tab left for these private schools? That also don't, if you look at them statistically, they don't do any better than our public schools. If you look at, I don't know if you all have the TCAP test here or some type of testing, there's no difference in a lot of cases with the results of being in these private schools, but we can show that if students are well funded in public schools and have the needs of like a counselor, social worker, have free lunch and free breakfast, if their whole needs are met, you see children doing better. And we have the data to prove that in Tennessee. With our community schools initiative that we've seen in a lot of our counties. And so it's kind of just been people recognizing that this is not in our interest, and making sure that they show up consistently at the Capitol. And then when these members go back to their district, they have that they're also met in their districts, at their town halls, at their ribbon cutting ceremonies with people resisting, so they know that again, that they're accountable to the folks in their district at the end of the day. So that's what we saw in Tennessee.
Representative Jones, thank you so much for what you do in Tennessee. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, working with an organization fighting persistent rural poverty in the United States. But a lot of that has to do with policy change around Medicaid expansion, especially in the South, from Mississippi to North Carolina or South Carolina now. We try to have a prophetic voice, calling on politicians to pass moral law around health access to healthcare. We get a lot of pushback from government relations directors of large organizations to say, don't do that. We've got to have bipartisan support, especially in a state like Mississippi that has a supermajority party. I'd love to hear your take on how do you balance a prophetic voice over against an attempt to get bipartisan support for policy like Medicaid expansion, public school support, and the list goes on.
I'm trying to think about the best person to answer this question, because in our state, what I recognized coming into office was that we are in a super minority. So I walk in with this mentality knowing that our job is basically to be in opposition, like to oppose these bad policies and try and stop the harmful ones. And so I think the way that I've balanced the prophetic task of challenging them and trying to find coalitions is first, trying to call them into the work that we're doing and saying to like a lot of my Republican colleagues that we met with these folks in your district. This is how they're being impacted, and we would love to work on this together, because it's not just about the interests of my constituents, but we have joint interests around this issue. Medicaid expansion. Tennessee has more rural hospitals closed per capita than any other state in the nation. I think Texas has the most in raw numbers, but we have the most per capita for our population. And with that issue, we brought the data. We showed that. We showed how many people are dying. We showed how much tax dollars is being left on the table. We showed we brought we brought the people who are just the numbers folks, the lobbyists for hospitals. We brought veterans who are being uninsured. And I mean, the sad thing in my state is none of that worked. And so what we did was, the first time I was ever arrested, we went to this Capitol with clergy and mothers who had lost their children. And we sat in the governor's office and we said, we're not going to leave until the governor meets with these people. And here's their stories of people like Michelle Ferdinand, whose daughter died from a blood clot in her leg because she didn't have access to health care. Here's the story of Larry Drain, who has seizures, who had to divorce his wife just so he could maintain his health coverage. Like, here are the real stories. And we had people come and dump thousands of shoes at their doors, trying to say, walk in the shoes of those who don't have access to health care. We tried to dramatize the issue. And what we saw with that was that not too long after that, the legislature got scared because they saw the governor moving on it. And so they passed the law to make sure that the governor doesn't have the authority to expand Medicaid anymore. It's just the legislature has to give him approval because they saw movement. And so, to be honest, I think the reality that I'm seeing in my state now is that we got to listen to Fannie Lou Hamer. She said, "Move on over, we'll move on over you because we're moving on." And so we tried to give them the data. And so now the goal is to say that if you don't want to move the interest of your constituents, we're going to do the thing out of love and remove you from this position of power that's left you callous and inhumane, and get people there who have some compassion. Because the hard reality too is that it's hard to work in bipartisanship in an environment where my colleagues have removed all the moderate members of their party. Everyone who's moderate, I'm friends with the former House Speaker, and she's like, this is not my party anymore. I mean, they become so extreme and so hateful. This MAGA poison is a cult. And so, you know, I hope that we can find people on the outside, but in our chamber, I think the reality is that we don't have a lot of bipartisan things, because we have people who don't think that this is a people's house. They think that it's a frat house or a palace or a country club. And that's what we've turned our capital, our state capitals into. And so the best news that I have right now is that the people of Tennessee are safe because the legislature is not in session. And so that's the only good news that we see. Every time the flag comes out of the General Assembly, the people are a little bit safe, their rights are a little bit more protected. And that's the sad reality that we want to change. We want people to be proud of their government and to be proud of what we're doing in that body. And hopefully we get there in God's timing. So the New Year told me I got to finish up. So thank you.